I always joke when I was growing up, sort of like, Dad, why can't we just go to the supermarket like normal people? Can we please go to the supermarket? Do we have to grow everything that we eat and make everything as well, you know? Of course, I was getting an extraordinary grounding in sort of artisanal sort of food production, and I didn't realise it.
This is The Crackling. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Growing up in an Italian-Australian family, Nino Zaccali experienced the most extraordinary food rituals, including the annual celebration of breaking down a whole pig and using every single part of it. It led to a career in food, where he now runs one of the best Italian restaurants in Australia. Nino, I know you've had a long career and connection with pork with your family and Italian heritage, but you're currently making house-made pancetta at Pendolino.
Yeah, we're doing it's actually guanciale, so the cheek, and using Dad's recipes. So we had a new chef de cuisine, head chef, join our business, and through COVID, George Kohler, and he's really into small goods. So I told him about my dad's recipe that he uses for guanciale, pancetta, all the cured and so we trialled it. So Dad's coming over in about a month's time. He said he's gonna do a quality control session and tell us whether we're doing any good with it, which we're looking forward to.
Well, tell us about the process and the decision to use your dad's recipe. Was it easy to wrestle it off him?
Dad's really funny. No, he's really generous with his recipes and methodology. He loves sharing all that stuff. He's just such a deep font of knowledge on everything to do with processing, curing food. And of course, pork is, there's Italy generally is not a lot of flat arable land, so pigs are really have become important in their sort of in terms of protein consumption, because they take up so little land and they can be so versatile. So pork was a big thing for us growing up, doing all the small goods. We do them once a year in the middle of winter, of course, when it's cold, and so making sausages and curing the meat. So the reason we got so excited about it was because, Dad's stuff is so good. That's basically it. So with the guanciale and with pancetta, we just heavily salt it down for a couple of days, and then you wash it with wine, and then you basically air cure it. And for the smaller cuts, it's sort of 2 weeks, and then it's ready to go. It's quite soft, but it's really beautiful, beautiful flavour. Of course, you can add. Dad would often put cracked black pepper or even fine pepper all over as an additional curing method. So, and then you can have it with other dried herbs and stuff as well. If you want to put rosemary, you're really right. The Tuscans are really big with the lardador and putting rosemary all over those kinds of cured cuts. Yeah, and it's pretty amazing. So it's awesome. We then cryovac it down, so we want to keep it really consistent for use for us. And even Dad now, he's very traditional in what he does, but he does own a little cryovac machine, and he loves that machine, so he uses it a lot. It's funny watching an 86-year-old white-haired Italian obsess over a cryovac machine in his home kitchen.
How important is the right pig for what you're doing with that? Do you have a direct relationship and source the pig that you need for this?
Yeah, well, we do. We've had a long association. I have for many years with actually a Victorian producer near Bannockburn called Golden Plains. It's used a lot in Victoria. It's amazing. They've got so these are free range bred pigs, and that live in eco shelters. So we know a lot about the animal husbandry of the product, which is really important. I've been to the farm, and they've got a specific dietary regime that they give the animals as well, and it's just it's not really so much about the breed, but it's more about the feeding regime and the way they look after these pigs. The flavour is really amazing. You're cooking fresh product. The crackling is really probably the best I've ever had in Australia. Having said all that, you know, if for the fattier cuts, it doesn't really matter so much, but I think if you're doing whole muscles, because in Italy, of course, they grow their pigs much bigger. And in Australia, pig producers get penalised for overgrowing pigs. So because of well, we've had a big obsession around fat quantity and how people that's been associated in a negative way with health issues. So, but in Italy, they grow their pigs much bigger. So you get more intramuscular fat, which is really important for curing whole muscle, like meat muscle rather than fat cuts. So for pancetta, for guanciale, it doesn't really matter. And even for sausages, because if you can mix the right fat content into the sausage when you're mincing it, we can do just about everything they do in Italy and, you know, and other places like Spain as well. But for the actual whole muscle cured meats, the intramuscular fat's really, really important. And the best I've had in Australia, and I haven't done this, but the best I've had is usually always Berkshire because it's you know, it's like the Wagyu of pork, and it does have more intramuscular fat inside the actual meat muscle. So that's really, really important. But it's traditionally something that we've really steered away from doing whole muscle cured cuts because of the fat, the intramuscular fat issue. It's a really big issue because they just taste salty rather than the flavour, these beautiful flavours you should get with proper prosciutto and culatello and cuts like that.
With your Italian heritage, when did you first develop an appreciation for the pig?
I'm not sure whether it's really hard. It's hard to say because it's always been there for me. It's and probably for most, you know, not only Italian culture, lots of European cultures, pork's huge. You know, so the French eat lots of it as well, and so the Spanish, of course, is really, really important in a similar way to Italy so for me, I don't know. That's really difficult because Dad's cured sausages and, you know, the annual ritual of killing the pig and making all the small goods is something that was always been there. So I don't really know. It's sort of something that we were, you know, before we were probably conscious, we were getting an unconscious appreciation of it, like everything else that was going on. I always joke when I was growing up, sort of like, Dad, why can't we just go to the supermarket like normal people and buy our food from the supermarket? Can we please go to the supermarket? Do we have to grow everything that we eat and make everything as well, you know? Of course, I was getting an extraordinary grounding in sort of artisanal sort of food production, and I didn't realise it, but when I was sent to boarding school, I realised really quickly that where I came from wasn't a bad place in terms of food, that's for sure.
Do you have any stories of those sort of yearly rituals, like breaking down a whole pig and making sausages and stuff like that?
Yeah, there's lots of them. There's funny stories of my dad. So my mum's side of the family are Anglo-Australians and they're farmers. So they've been livestock farmers in the southwest of Western Australia for about 100 years. Traditionally, they were dairy farmers and cream for butter, and then in sort of more recent decades, sort of transitioned more to beef, and they would grow pigs and stuff as well. So they would have everything on the farm, and this was in Capel in Western Australia, and of course, Dad would go to see my grandfather and my mother's father to get livestock if he ever wanted to do something like the pig every year. and they were sort of like they were pretty interested in the whole process as well. Thought it was quite amazing, the way that the pig was treated annually. So I guess the thing is that it's about the pig. Really, this process it's really about taking a fresh product and having it as a sort of like preserving caloric value for 12 months so they can eat it. And of course, and this is the same really for cheese. Cheese is exactly the same. All the vegetables that are pickled it's the same. It's about when you've got an abundance of one thing, learning how to really, and really, sort of artisanal way, making it something that's really beautiful to eat for the whole 12 months. So, and cheese is that as well. When you've got an abundance of milk, you turn it into a hard protein that you can eat through the whole year. So the pig is really the same. It's like you kill an animal and it's really important to eat every little bit of it. And I think for me, that's where the real beauty in the art form is, actually being able to eat every part of the animal, but make it so beautiful to eat. And anyway, Dad was always obsessed because he came to Australia from deep poverty, like most migrants did and do, and so every little bit of the pig would be used. So, and my mum's side of the family, in those days everyone was pretty frugal, and offal was eaten a lot more than it is today, purely through necessity as well. But Dad was, like most Italians, migrant Italians, were obsessed around using every little part of the pig. And so when they would bleed the pig, Dad would, have a bucket underneath the throat. It sounds very gory, but it's what you do. So, so they'd bleed the pig, and then they would beat the blood. So the blood would be made into like a black pudding, or the Calabresi actually make beautiful desserts with it as well, which sounds very gory, but it's actually beautiful. It's a chocolate dessert that they make, which is stunning. And so Dad would get the blood. He would get every little bit of it. Of course, the trotters are celebrated. Like in Calabrese culture, the pig's trotters are like they're like a really revered thing, and I love them too. So anyway, when you kill a pig, as a lot of the listeners will know, there is a final squeal that the pig actually makes after it's shot or as it's shot, and the Anglo side of the family asked Dad before they killed the pig. He didn't really know what the word squeal meant, but they asked him to go and get a bucket for the squeal. So Dad would run off madly to go get this bucket, and he's holding it by the head of the pig, and then he says, "Where's the squeal? I want the squeal." You can't chuck the squeal out. Give it to me, So anyway, that was just one of these funny things. It was a bit of a joke, but it became a bit of a story of legend. It's interesting. I was just in Italy, and I've got to say that even in Italy now, the consumption of offal and what they call the quinto quarto, so the fifth quarter of the pig, i.e. the quarter of the pig that nobody wants. It's really, they eat a lot less of it even in Italy nowadays. And I was at an amazing restaurant in Milan called Trippa, which is the word for tripe in Italian. So it's a restaurant that specialises in specialises in offal and earling vegetables from all over Italy. He's a chef. He's fantastic. His name Diego Rossi, and he's basically a vegan and pretty much only cooks offal and earling vegetables. Yeah, and he's one of the fittest people I've ever met, and he does it so well. It was amazing. My partner, wife, is she's pescatarian but predominantly vegetarian, and the vegetable dishes were so amazing as well. So it was really interesting, and there's a big emphasis on pork in his restaurant as well. And it's just. It's interesting. And that's one of the hottest tickets in Milan in terms of restaurants at the moment. So that's really good to see some of the tradition being brought back even in Italy nowadays.
Given your upbringing and that understanding and appreciation of using the whole pig that was in your family heritage, when you became a professional chef, what was it like creating dishes in restaurants to ensure consistency, but trying to use the sort of cuts that you love of a pig?
Yeah, well, I guess a lot of us really probably quite counter cyclical on this stuff, and we're always interested in doing stuff that is. I mean, it's really funny because in the early days it was like, went back 20 years ago, 25 years ago, you wouldn't dream that you'd see pork belly in a supermarket, and you definitely couldn't ever imagine that you could buy a pork fillet for $14 a kilo, whilst the pork belly was $28 a kilo in a supermarket. It's just crazy in terms of trend. So for me, when I started, it was like pork belly was like one of the most awesome cuts you could ever use, because that's what we grew up with. A lot of our sauces were made with pork belly and skin. Actually, just some sauces were made just with skin of the pig, and really, really stunning. So, nowadays it's probably one of the most prime cuts and most luxurious cuts of the pig is the pork belly, which we always thought it was. But once upon a time, they could barely give it away. And so I guess for me, it's fascinating just to see the evolution of trends and tastes. And of course, a lot of this is done really through sort of trickle down effect from chefs. I think Peter Gilmore, original sort of pork belly and scallop dish a long time ago now, was probably almost single-handedly changed the perception of pork belly and gave chefs permission to use it in a way that we hadn't been able to. And I always used it. We had a dish right back in 2000 in Otto when we first opened. We used to serve roasted pork belly then. It was hard to find on menus, but everyone would everyone really loved it. So
tell us about that dish.
Well, it was just a cutlet we did. It was sort of like a rista, which was a cutlet that we did that we did it like a sort of like Tuscan, Roman, that central part of Italy sort of style, where they'll roast the whole rack. So we did an individual cutlet, but we served it with a piece of roasted. We would whole roast whole pork bellies and serve it almost like you get roasted, the pork belly, in Chinese restaurants, and we serve it with a beautiful piece of roasted pork belly and crackling with the cutlet, and just a beautiful little frisee salad. Escarola is like a vegetable that is difficult to get in really good quality in Australia, but a beautiful fresh little salad. And we would roast it with with roasted garlic and fennel, like a fennel powder that we made, fennel citrus powder that we made, with some rosemary as well. Traditional way to do it in that part of Italy. Well, as our interpretation of it. And so that was 2001, so just 20 years ago. And then pork belly was really, you didn't see it on menus, and we didn't even advertise that we were putting it on the plate. We just put it on the plate because it tastes so good, and everyone goes, it's amazing. So
you mentioned sauces that you used to make with skin. Can you tell us about that? And do you have an example or two of them?
Yeah, so sometimes they would do some really interesting, and so the Italians don't really smoke meats very much. So, but they would sometimes do smoked, like cured sausages. They would smoke them and then they would store them. Under lard, almost like a confit, and then pull them out through the year as you want to use them, rather than air cure them. Air cure them for a while, then they'd submerge them in lard and leave them very much like confit duck and confit goose in France, and a slightly smoked flavour. In Calabria, they use a lot of, it's like andouillas really, comes from there. So there's a lot of, you'd say chili, but it's almost like capsicum sort of, they use lots of sort of dried chili in the sausages. It's really, really, so you get a very strong paprika kind of flavour coming through. Not really smoked, but this particular sausage was a lot like that because it was smoked, and they've submerged that. And they did a similar thing with the skin. And of course with the skin you do have a layer of some fat, and they would submerge that as well. So once again, this is all about killing an animal and then using the caloric value through, an extended period of time through the year, because the consumption, and everyone talks about the Mediterranean diet being one of the best for health, sort of blue zone type sort of diet. But what they're really talking about is the diet of the Mediterranean, probably in the 1950s and 60s, because that diet was so animal protein was eaten a lot less, and there's a lot of protein came from legumes and vegetable matter. And so the diet of that period, meat was part of it, but probably nowhere near what we eat today. So this methodology, you might pull a little bit of sausage out, then you might make a sauce or a skin. You might make a classic tomato sauce with that, or a ragu, with something that's semi-cured. And then there was also when the pig was killed, also there was also the treatment of the fresh meat as well while it was fresh. So the skin would often be used, and then just made like a meat ragu. So you would just sort of normal treatment, but you used the protein would be, and of course you get this beautiful unctuous kind of tomato based sauce with cubes of like skin with a little bit of fat underneath it that you'd use for pasta. The nicest thing you've ever eaten in terms of that style of a pasta. It's just amazing. So, and you get this like gelatinous jelly kind of thing going on, this beautiful pork fat with the tomato, and it's not on Jenny Craig's list of things to eat, really. But if you have it once every 3 or 4 months, it's probably okay for you. Beautiful, just really, really beautiful, and you'd that'd often have some rosemary in it as well. You get a little bit of rosemary and tomato, and and that's one of my favourite pastas of all time. I don't cook it very often because my wife doesn't eat. She's pescatarian, so I'm a big fan. But and to a lot of people, I don't think that the idea of a sauce made with pigskin is sounds appetizing. It would be for you, Anthony, I know, but not for everybody. Definitely got a little bit tricky in the restaurant to sell as well. But it's beautiful. I can assure you, it's amazing, and one of these great examples of how to use something which is. Which is perceived as, of course, cotechino is, a similar thing where it's a pigskin sausage, which, is absolutely revered from sort of, more than, in Emilia-Romagna and up, and of course in Friuli they have a version called musetto, which is but similar thing, but made with the snout of the pig, exclusively the snout of the pig, and heavily spiced with cinnamon and stuff. So musetto in Friuli is really, their version of zampone, and that's just, it's so good. It's just so beautiful, and and lots of collagen, and really good for you as well.
Pendolino is one of Australia's best Italian restaurants. Is the version of Pendolino that we see today, is that the same as the vision you had when you first started?
Pendolino, I mean, I guess like most restaurants that, we opened in '08, in Easter of '08, so we're sort of into our 15th year, I think now. So sort of in restaurant years, like dog years, that's, you have to multiply that up to get a true sense of the age. Look, for like most restaurants, it's evolved, and it's really evolved a lot. And I guess the evolution of the restaurants, like a lot of things, has really been fast tracked through COVID as well. So that's been a big change for us. And I think really the DNA is the same from when we first opened, but it's just really grown up into an adult, and that's been driven largely by our client base and expectations around the restaurant and stuff that we wanted to do. So COVID was really tricky. We of course had to open up for 10 people at one stage, which was kind of sounded crazy. And I had arguments with industry association lobbying for us around what the point of that was. And the feedback to me was, well, just make it work for yourself if you can. And so, look, we've with all the restrictions, we had to really change what we were doing. So we've made the tables are bigger. We've taken seating capacity out. We have a much stronger emphasis on tasting formats more than we did before. We did this because we didn't have a choice, and we wouldn't have done it with COVID. But I guess when we did it, was really very surprising to us that the feedback we got from our client base, our core client base, was that they thought it was brilliant and much preferred it, which was bizarre for us because we weren't expecting that. And so, yeah, it's kind of gone to another level again, but not really through our volition, through necessity, through COVID. And it's kind of settled in. It's coming out of COVID in a different place, and I'm really happy about that because it's kind of the Pendolino that I've always kind of wanted, but was never probably quite had the full guts to do. And we're forced to do a lot of this stuff, and I guess everything that you really need to pay attention to and take care of, we just had to really monitor how everything was being taken, because it was risky doing it as well. Look, it's as I said before, I think it's really the DNA is really there. I think it's really evolved and really matured as a version of itself, and that's what's happened. It's a little bit different. But we've just been to Europe and to Italy, and I guess the whole world's had not much hasn't changed in some significant way, is what we're seeing, and so that's really what's happened.
There's been a real renaissance with Italian food in Australia, and an incredible connection between Italy and Australia from a culinary sense on Australia's dining landscape. How do you describe the offering and the food of Pendolino?
I think, this seems to be more and more and more and more Italian all the time, and I guess for us, it's and this process that's happened through COVID, I guess it's around us probably really owning our identity, I guess, more and more, which is it is a refined restaurant now, and it's still the sense of classic Italian food, and the flavours have to. I always say to the guys, if a 90-year-old Italian out of Italy doesn't need to relate to every single dish, but they need to be able to relate to the flavours, and they need to be able to, because if you take a Sicilian and you take them to northern Italy and you eat the traditional food of that region, it's not their food. They won't necessarily totally relate to it, but they're usually going to like it because it's really well-made food. So for me, it's like the evolution, you just can't lose sight of really the essence of Italian cooking. And for me, the essence of Italian cooking is really about flavors that taste amazing. The food has to be amazing to eat. And, you know, it's interesting, even in Italy, we have a pretty important wine program where we source wines from sort of 2022 boutique predominantly family-owned producers in and out of Italy and a little bit out of Champagne. And so we're there pre-COVID. We're there, and we just come back. But we're there pretty much every year, so we get to see stuff that's going on in Italy and the evolution there. And for a long time, I think the Michelin star and a high-level Michelin star, whilst it was definitely, you know, warranted 2-3 Michelin stars restaurants, it didn't usually feel to me like it was Italian food. It tasted like food or an international restaurant kind of style of food, but with I guess Italian inspiration, and that's what it was like. But that's changing too. You know, some of my favourite restaurants, I used to hate Michelin star restaurants in Italy because it didn't taste like Italian food, but now I don't think I think that's changed. I think it's evolved over there too. So, you know, Dal Pescatore, which is the longest standing 3 Michelin star restaurant, was avant-garde 24 years ago, but not really now. You know, the food is, you know, it tastes like Italian food. Casa Perbellini in Verona is just, you know, 2 Michelin stars. The food is unmistakably Italian. It's not all the dishes the Veronese will even relate to, but it tastes beautiful. And so I guess from our perspective, you know, we've, you know, the service elements are pretty, you know, they're pretty elevated at Pendolino now. We have trolley services for Prosecco and wine that you start the meal. We do the same with grappas and cognacs, and we do a little, you know, complimentary truffles that we do off of the trolley. So there's all these elements that have come into what we do that, have sort of changed it. I guess our space is probably now very much, it's, you know, it's a refined Italian dining experience, and, you know, everything's sort of handcrafted and hand sourced. We make all the breads. We make, you know, of course we have, we sort of profile some of the best extra virgin olive oil on the planet. As simple as that. All grown in Australia, I might add. Among oils that rank in the top sort of 20 extra virgin olive oils of the year every year internationally. Shows like New York, which is the big one. And I'm still a sort of a national olive oil judge. So there's a big emphasis on that. And yeah, I guess it's, I think that's why, you know, that's sort of really where we kind of sit in the sort of dining scene in terms of Italian restaurants in Australia now. Yeah.
How important is it for you to pass on the knowledge of great produce like a pig to the next generation of chefs coming through your kitchen?
I think there's a real keenness. Like, I think, you know, I think that a lot of people are really, it's not something that you need to encourage too much. The guys are pretty into it, and that's nice to see. I guess stuff like getting my dad's recipe for the guanciale, to make guanciale and to do things like that. And just every time you know, you're like, traveling to Italy is really important for us as well, because you do see new stuff, and it's so regional, like micro-regional. Like every 5-10 kilometres, the things change. There's something like 300 bolognese ragu recipes, like depending on, you know, every little town's different. So, but for me, it's this new stuff, but it's also being reminded of the greatness of traditional Italian traditions in cooking. So, for me, it's you know, things are lost with every generation, and new things happen. But I think the young guys and girls really. I think they're really quite interested in it. You know, they're quite genuinely quite, you know, renowned. Yeah, I mean, something bizarre has happened through COVID as well. As my son's been working with us for most of it. Luca, who's 20, and he's There's a funny story with that. He sort of, as a saviour of our business to a large degree, got all his mates that are studying at uni to come and work for us who'd never sort of had a job before, half these guys. And it's because we live in an era now where, where not everybody needs a part-time job, I guess. And because it's a different time in history, but these kids have really seemed to have grown as individuals and people just by actually going to work and dealing with people. And we get feedback from the parents saying that they've just become nicer, much nicer kids. And since starting work, and one of them's developed into a full section waiter, which is amazing. He's selling caviar and truffles and $400 bottles of wine and he's doing it really well, which blew our mind. And then another friend, and for the record, I tried to talk my son out of wanting to become a chef, and I tried to talk him out of it in great length. But he's doing it. He's enrolled in TAFE, and then one of his mates, who's sort of a year or two into an engineering course at universities, decided that he wants to be a chef and stop his engineering, which I took about 3 months try and talk him out of that as well, and then he said, "No, I'm going to do it. I want to be a chef." And I said, "Okay, that's good. Now I want to sit down with your parents. Maybe your parents, I can talk some sense into them." But no, they were convinced that he needed to be a chef as well. So anyway, he's no longer studying engineering. He's now in sort of first year apprentice at Pendolino as a chef. So on some levels, it's so nice to see these kids actually doing something that a lot of people are not looking at anymore because there's a perception that it's not. But these kids are sort of like connecting with stuff that they really enjoy doing. They really, really like it, and they like working with produce. They like the tactile nature, that kinesthetic sort of process of cooking, and which is beautiful because it's why we all started doing it, for a love of food and produce and this transformation that we do. I really believe in Australia that we need to be promoting. There needs to be a pathway between vocational education and training and tertiary pathways. It needs to be stronger so that more of these stories can happen. And it's not a dead-end story where you become a chef and then you get to your mid-30s and, don't want to work in kitchens anymore and not have anywhere to go in terms of the management or whatever. So I think there really needs to be a rethinking of, I've said this a lot, that there really needs to be this pipeline, really a pathway, like an interface. It needs to be overt from the start, where you can start an apprenticeship and transition to a tertiary course, whether it be business or marketing or whatever. Because, particularly say front of house and sommeliers and wait staff, it's the perfect training to become a spirits industry or a wine industry executive if you come through restaurants and do full sommelier training. Same with a chef. If you want to work in any of the producer industries, to be a chef first, I mean, the big lack that a lot of producers have is they don't have that knowledge. So in some ways, I might sound like I've discouraged it, but I also see that this is the way forward. I think a lot more people would enter our industry and do it with great joy. It's just that kids are discouraged from a very young age because there's this perception that it's a dead end job to some degrees, and it's really not. It's quite the opposite. It can be an amazing launch pad for a stronger career in restaurants or even the associated industries, which is big business.
Well, Nino, it's an absolute honour to have a chat with you today. You're a bloody inspiration. And as ever, please keep in contact, and we'll catch up again soon.
Always a pleasure, Anthony. As I said, there's no problem. Have a good chat.
This is The Crackling, a Deep in the Weeds production in partnership with Porkstars. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we catch up with some of Australia's best chefs and pork producers to discover what makes Australian pork so special.